Okay, so today I want to show you some of the techniques that you'll use to install a zipper in Letters from the Open Road. I'm working on a swatch from the original stages of my design for this sweater, and as we work through it, you'll probably notice it has a terrible tea stain on it from a spilled cup of tea. So don't think that that's any reflection of the yarn. That's a reflection of my messy workspace. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is mark on the zipper a guideline. You have a couple choices for this. You can either use tailor's chalk if it will show up, or a water erasable or other temporary marking pen. It won't really be seen except by you because it's going to be on the inside. So whatever works best for you. And then we're just going to mark a scant 1/4 inch so that we have a way to line up our stitches later. And we'll do this on both sides. You'll notice I have the zipper pull facing down because we want to be able to see this while we are sewing. And if your zipper pull gets in the way, no big deal, just move it. We're going to do that on both sides. Okay, so we have a line marked on both sides of our zipper pull. It's coming through. I usually use tailor's chalk. This is a water-soluble pen, so those marks will come out. On this side, before we get started, what I want to show you is what it looks like on the wrong side. So to make this sweater, first thing you'll do is you'll knit this panel. Then you'll pick up stitches along this edge only. You won't pick up stitches here. You'll pick up stitches here and work in this direction. These welts are formed by working back and forth slipping stitches. When you get to the last one, you'll do the same thing as you did for the others, but you'll keep going until it curls over on itself. And then you'll bind off using kind of a modified 3-needle bind off. So it's a 3-needle bind off worked on just 2 needles, which will create your bind off row kind of in the middle of the back here. And in the pattern, I'll refer to a bound off edge on the final welt. That's this edge right here. And that will become our placement for tacking down the zipper, sewing down the zipper edge. And that ensures that our zipper ends up in a consistent place the entire length of the sweater, and we have some nice straight lines, and it's not too fussy. When you pick up and work the collar, you will actually pick up 2 stitches on this side, and then turn the work and continue picking up and working stitches around to the other side. And what that does is it creates an edge here that's consistent and flush with this edge here. And so you'll continue to slip stitches, basically creating an I-cord edge on that side, a slipped I-cord edge, so that you have a really finished edge on both this part and this part that looks consistent. Another thing to note is you'll see that this is kind of pulling up. This was my first swatch and I ended up adjusting the number of stitches. You can see that having a perfect placket relies on having the width of the front piece that you're picking up along match the gauge of the width here, the length that you work back and forth. And so in the pattern, you'll see that there is suggestions for trying out your gauge on your swatch. Just to make sure that you're happy with the needle size that you're using, or if you need to pick up 1 or 2 more stitches. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is anchor down our zipper and make sure that we are tacking it to our garment in a way that it lines up on both sides. So keep your zipper zipped as you do this next step. Okay, we're going to be lining up this edge of the zipper with this bound off edge, and we'll do that just by kind of overlapping it, and then we'll come in and I'll show you how to whip stitch it in a second. But for now, we're just going to tack it, and we want to make sure that we're not you're going to be up a little higher because we want our zipper stop here to be pretty close to the top there. And I recommend that you make your first tack kind of at this point, and then flip it over and make sure that the other one matches too. And this doesn't have to be fancy. This is just, we're just anchoring it in place. Using a lot of pins can distort the fabric as you're trying to sew it, and so having some anchor stitches that aren't pinned can let us work on it without worrying about it moving around too much or our pins falling out. Get this guy out of here. And then I'm just going to repeat the process down here. On your sweater, you'll also have a hem. This is a swatch, so I don't. So since mine is just an example, I will just tack it. With a tangle. There we go. And I'm just making a couple stitches. I'm not really even knotting it. I just want it to stay in place. And then finally, we got to deal with that top up there. And like before, now that this is tacked down there, we can go ahead and unzip this a little bit so that we're not having distortion from the zipper pull, making this more difficult than it needs to be. And we can just, this one you don't have anything to line it up to yet, so you'll just do a couple stitches here. I'm just kind of picking up into the yarn. I'm not doing anything fancy. Okay, so now we're tacked down. Our next step is going to be to go ahead and do that whip stitching. And whip stitching is just, it's kind of a stitch that sounds like what it is called, right? So I like to come up from behind, so I'm kind of hiding my knot on this side. And then I'm just going to stick my needle in here under and then nab just the very edgiest edge here. Okay, so we're just whipping the very edge of the zipper to the bound off edge. And we don't want it too tight. We want it to have a little room to wiggle and breathe and move. So it's not a real harsh tug that we're going to do there. And we're just going to go all the way down the side. And so you can see how that bound off edge becomes the guide for the edge of the zipper. Okay, so here we go. Our edge is all signed down along the back, right against that terribly tea-stained welt there, or that last bind off on that last welt. When you flip it over, you can see we're not quite finished though, because we still have this like flappy business. But we have this nice line here that's going to help us mark it in place. And so to do that, we will use this line on the wrong side. And we will be coming in and grabbing. Now I want this to look plump, so I'm gonna try and kind of pick up along a row of stitches in here to sew down that kind of pushes it back some. But if you want to, you can choose to draw your line closer into the zipper. Yeah, so I'm gonna come right up through here, and every zipper is a little different too. I'm gonna come up through my blue, up through my line. It's hard to do this while filming. And I'm gonna come between these two stitches and grab a thread and pull it through. And I'm gonna go right back down in the same exact location. And that's how we're gonna go. So we're gonna just the whole way down. And so you can see, you can be really consistent here about which kind of single strand between the stitches that you're picking up. And sew it down. Then you get a nice perfect edge, equally distanced from your zipper teeth. There's no kind of fidgetiness about where the thing belongs. And I can just see the stitches in there. The ones I'm putting in. so that I stay in the same row. And then come back down. And we will just do that every stitch the entire length. Now, one thing I want to say about sewing, in knitting, if you have to take your stitches out, it can be high risk. You have to pick up and knit. You're losing a ton of work. Hand finishing is a different thing entirely. So if I decide that I don't like the way this has turned out, or that I'm not quite perfectly aligned, it's a much less of a big deal to just kind of run a pair of scissors down those stitches and take them out and start over. I haven't really lost my place. I don't have to like pick up stitches and make sure that they're all there. I just kind of start over. It's not a very big deal. Yeah. Great. And then for simplicity's sake, to kind of keep things moving here, because this does take a little bit of time. And it takes time, but it's so hard to mess up because everything is just kind of lined up for you. And I'm just real quick putting in a couple double stitches so that I can take us to the next step. Because the next step is doing the tops and of the collar and the hem. But you can see how that kind of is a little plumped up, and by the time it's like perfectly spaced, and have enough room to move our zipper beautifully. And it creates a lot of depth and dimension by kind of plumping up. But you can put this wherever you want it to relative to the edge of your sweater. When you steam it, you can, at the end, you can really encourage it to get fancy. So let's go on to the top. So at the top, we're going to use a backstitch. And I'm going to start just by putting in a couple of, by sewing down just the top of this so you can kind of see what it will look like going into it. So we'll do the same, actually, exact thing we just did at the bottom for just a stitch or two. And so the Whipstitch is much more of a traditional like zipper installation in a knit. Most sweaters don't have like a welted band, of course, so they're not going to have that same, they're not going to have this, and so it's much more traditional to use a backstitch to get those knits sewn to a zipper. Let's do just one more. Leave room for one more. Yeah, so this one's actually going to hit right at the very end between the two. That's kind of a nice place to have our last stitch be. Okay. And back down. All right, so what we want to do here is we want to make sure that we are encouraging this edge here to line up with the work we've just done, right? And I haven't really used pins because I'm working on a small sample, but you might end up using some pins. And in fact, I think I'm going to put one in here just to kind of keep me anchored as I go. You can see it kind of distorts things, so if you can use thread to baste, it's a little less distorted. But so to do a backstitch, we are going to kind of come up at this very edge of stitches here. So you can see we've got this tubular edge that is going to give us one edge of stitches. So we're going to come up, then we're going to go back through the bar. There's some ends on the back that we're going to watch out for. Okay. And so that kind of just sinks down into there. And so that one came in there and back out there. So now we want to come up and back. And so that's why it's called a backstitch, is when we're on the wrong side, we're going forward 2 stitches worth. And then we're on the, so 1, 2, and then on the front. We're going to go back 1. And that's how you would normally put a zipper in to a knit. And so that's exactly what we're going to do here. An I-cord edge is a pretty standard, I don't want to pull it so tight that it gets weird, right? I want to give it a little room to breathe still. So let me see where we are. We did that one, that one. And we'll just do that all the way up to the top. And we'll do the same thing at the hem. Take this pin out now. And so you can see, I've only done up to here, but how that creates a nice, perfectly smooth edge. So here we are at the top. I went ahead and sewed up the rest of it, and it's time to sort out the tab at the top. Okay. And it's really, you just fold it. So let's go ahead and do that. Fold it, and you want to make sure it's out of the way of the teeth. So I have a loop back here still. There we go. So it has to come kind of a little bit off to the side. So I'm going to start by anchoring this with just a stitch or two. And then before I go any further, I'll pull down the zipper and make sure that I'm not impeding its movement. Okay, so that's anchored. We work. Okay, and so this has all been sewn down. None of this has, because I'm just doing a demo. And then what we'll continue to do is we'll just kind of continue to sew down this edge here. And then let's do something nice looking with this guy, like tuck it under the rest of the way. I'm going to use the end of this to see if I can get it to get in there. Oh, it looks nice. Okay. It's the part of hand sewing that's like a little subjective, right? And I'm just going to continue to whip stitch this edge to kind of the back middles of some of these stitches. So it's kind of folded under. You can do whatever looks nice there. Whatever seems like it'll lay flat and behave itself. Shoop. Okay. All right. And then I kind of want to get my thread kind of back to my starting point because we still have a few more things to whip the stitch down. And that is this edge here. So we sewed along the blue when we were doing our backstitch, but we want to keep this like nice and finished too. And so there's going to be a little column of knits here that you can just ticky-tack that edge to. And that's how you did the top. And you would do the bottom more or less the same. You probably won't have to tuck the end of the zipper at the bottom, but if you do, no big deal. Yeah, and then had we actually finished this, this side would be entirely done. And you can see it will create an edge that is perfectly lined up, perfectly smooth, and each step kind of sets you up for success with the next one. When you're done, you might go in and steam it. I like to steam it just to kind of set the cotton thread and to give this guy some nice shape and maybe even out any pucker that you're seeing. And then you just have a nice zipped cardie. And then you do the other side, I guess. But then you have a nice zipped cardie.